Alright, so what I'm putting on is all metal. This is stuff we told you about before. Dave and I, as soon as we got in here this morning, we had put seam sealer over the welds just to flow them out to level them off so they're nice and even once paint's over them. So we may not make it to paint today, but it'll be close. Okay, it's another dark and dreary Saturday, and this green stuff you see is an epoxy or an acid etching primer. You can buy this stuff in a rattle can, and if you're doing a lot of metal work at yourself, I highly encourage you, once you make repairs, to apply this over your repair once it's done and before you put body filler or primers or anything else on. Apply this stuff, let it sit. If you can let it sit for the week or a weekend, great. If you have to let it flash off for a couple hours and keep going, so be it. But if you put this down, you're only ensuring the idea that you're going to protect that metal long term and rust won't go from a dormant state to active state, bubbling up your hard work you just did. So anyway, this is acid etching primer. We had welded up all the holes, as you know. We applied all metal over those repair areas. Now we put the acid etch over all that. So essentially, everything in here looks relatively smooth, like nothing happened, like there wasn't any holes, albeit factory or not. And now we're getting to the point where we're going to start taping off and preparing to shoot this engine bay. Yeah, we're shooting the engine bay before the front clips on. The reason is because you get the oh so rare opportunity to paint all the stuff in here that never sees paint. And so that was the primary reason why I wanted to do it this way. After the paint's done in the engine bay, as we're moving on to the rest of the body, taking the windows out and sanding down things, I'm going to start laying out where components go in this car. Now, one of the things we are using in this car is we're using a high capacitive discharge ignition system. Okay, that is where you have coils, a series of coils that will be mounted on the wall, and they're an inductive discharge instead of capacitive discharge. And what's the difference? Well, I know a lot of you have seen those really cool ideas where people are putting spark plug wires through the firewall and there's a discharging system on the inside for clean effects on the engine bay. I cannot tell you how dangerous that is, because depending on what kind of high firing ignition system you have, at a minimum, if that discharge is on you, at a minimum, you're going to have some very, very upset nerves, and you're going to have a very upset passenger. And it's going to shock the living hell out of you. If it is a high firing discharge system like we're putting in this, if it discharges on you, it could potentially kill you. So the cool factor of having it on the inside of the car, rock and roll. If that's what you want to do, knock yourself out. But you need to know it is immensely dangerous. So we're putting it on the wall right there, and the wires will come down to the engine. And it's going to be a really clean look, simple look. It's about the only item you're going to see in this car that's of a modern build. There's just no way about it, because I'm not about to put it on the inside of the car. Anyway, so we'll be mapping out where things go. By having that there, I don't have to worry about having a coil over here. I don't have to worry about all sorts of other items that we're traditionally used to seeing inside these cars. As you already know, the fuse block is going to be on the inside, so the only wiring coming through here is for the engine supports and for the headlights. And everything else in here is going to be much, much cleaner in that effect. We're going to put a few little trick things in there that you're going to enjoy when we get to that point. But for the most part, this is what it is. Clean, no holes, very simple. Okay, so I promise you the next time you saw this, the engine bay will be in color. Now granted, we're not using the most sophisticated camera or magic lighting to show what this color really is, but it is in fact correct AR301 blue. Anyhow, so it's there, and now I'm going to start focusing on the real things that need to happen. Like we're going to be putting in our Spica fuel filter system. and running that secondary line. There's other things we're going to be doing today, hopefully. With that said, the other thing that has happened, you're going to see, is that I'm going to put all the rubber gaskets that I can put in at this point in place as well. So those little things like that that really start to help define the efforts done. But at the end of the day, what you really get to take away from is, remember all the holes that we welded up in here? You don't see any of them. We didn't put lots of primers and things like that in there because, again, the more material you put down, meaning primers and paints and things of that nature, the less durable it is. And there's one place in the car that needs to be pretty durable on the paint, that's the engine bay, which is also yet another reason why we're using single stage paint. It's less material that you have to apply. So you kind of get a sense of where it's going. Right about now, you're probably wondering, when are we putting the front clip on? Well, we're going to do that essentially at the very last second, if you will. As long as I don't have it here in my way, it's easier to work in this engine bay. And that's a win that you just can't trade for by putting the clip on. Anyway, let me get going. Believe it or not, that is effectively somewhat of a day's work. Because most of these parts weren't cleaned or anything, so everything got vapor blasted and painted and whatnot. But what are we looking at? This is the Spica filter system. This is going to be supply fuel coming in through the filter, out the filter, into the pump, back from the pump, back to the tank. So the next time we do something on this, you're going to see us doing the swirl pot and the supply pump and all those things in the back of the car. And I'll explain the reason why we're doing those things. But anyway, so as you remember from before, there's our throttle cable for the speaker pump, which effectively sits right about here. Now, if you look back up here in the corner, that is our electric motive coil packs. Now, a lot of you folks see something like that inside the car, and that's really not a good idea, because if the wires ever discharge onto you, you got a huge problem. And there's a difference between a capacitive and an inductive discharge system. This one has enough potential power to potentially not only harm you, but potentially kill you. So there's no way in hell I'm putting that on the inside of the car. Anyway, so the Spica style throttle pedal and all the firewall grommets, and remember our dual cylinder within one chamber brake and clutch reservoir is in. Next stop is we'll put the steering box in, we'll reestablish the steering linkage system, and then finally I'm also going to put the brand new, I should say brand new restored brake master on, and we'll talk about that as well, why that I prefer to restore them versus buying new ones. Anyhow, quite a bit of progress for one day. It's just one of those things that it takes a lot of time, but it is something well worth doing and doing well, because when it's all said and done, a clean engine bay says a whole lot about the owner. Okay, so as you'll see in a few minutes, we don't buy brand new brake boosters and master cylinders and things of that nature, because quite frankly we have found most of the reproduction, as until recently, were somewhat flawed, or they didn't last very long, so we start sending them out and having them restored. The nice thing about having them restored is they inspect the master cylinders and the brake boosters, and if the piston area is too corroded, they sleeve them, and they're guaranteed to last a very long time. Anyhow, so what we're doing now is we are installing the clutch master for our 69 pedal box. Now you can't just go bolting this up and get after it, because the pedal has to be in its rest position, so you have to identify where that is by looking in there. Voila, mark that. Then you adjust your threading and position this where it needs to be, and then you're going to mount it over here. It takes a little bit of work, a little bit of forethought, but if you're lucky enough to have a 69 pedal box and the ability to do all this, you want to go hydraulic clutch on your early car. Way to go. Okay, so it's the end of another Saturday, and it doesn't look like a whole lot of progress, but believe me, it is a tremendous amount of progress. Because not only did we run all the brake lines, and that's all back and established, but we added the clutch lines, the clutch location, and we set it up on the geometry of the pedal so it's the way it's supposed to be. Anyhow, it's not the most complicated thing in the world to do, it's very hard to find these original parts. Now again, this is from a Land Rover 109 series, but it's a dual reservoir. We like that because one side feeds the clutch and the other side will feed the brake, and it'll be more than enough. Okay, so anyway, so we got our brand new booster in. We tend to not buy new boosters, not because the resellers are to blame, but we have a lot of them that have failed within weeks of them being installed. Now we've been told on many occasions that that has improved. However, I prefer to go ahead and just have these restored, because one thing a restoration shop's going to do that a mass producer is not, is they're going to test the inside of the sleeve and make sure that it is absolutely perfect, and if not, they're going to put in a new brass sleeve, and that is going to ensure that it lasts an incredibly long time. So it's just the assurances from that I prefer to use these. We also have the master cylinders done as well, and you'll see what the clutch master looks like that we added in for our hydraulic clutch setup. But anyway, with that said, all the lines have been ran. We have the Spica fuel filter set up, ready to go, with the fuel pressure light on it, which is something I want on the dash of this car. Other than that, we have the electromotive coil packs ready to go. There will be no distributor in this car, and that's about the most modern and only modern thing you're going to see inside this engine bay. I do prefer the high firing activity of that. I know you've seen these put on the insides of cars, but it's a different kind of system. At the end of the day, these things can be very dangerous, and this one has potential to kill you. It produces that much amperage of electricity. There's a difference between an inductive coil system and a capacitive coil system, and this is far, far, far more dangerous. Anyway, so now we're going to go look at the clutch pedal assembly that's now installed, and because after that, the next move on this is to weld that front clip on and start getting this car ready for paint. Okay, so this is the infamous 69 clutch reservoir. This is essential when you want to run a hydraulic clutch, and you got to have this assembly to include this linking right here. Again, we're lucky enough to have these, but at the end of the day, this is going to provide us a much smoother shifting apparatus than we would normally have had, especially for the amount of power that we're putting into this car. Anyway, with that said, this is bolted through the channel just like it is on a 69, but here you go. This is a 65 Ti with a 69 pedal assembly. You can see it's a little bit complicated on its articulation, but nonetheless, you got to have this entire assembly, not just this, but you got to have the 69 pedal box in order to achieve this. And the value of that is you're not making extensive modifications to the car just for the sake of having hydraulic clutch. But the trade-off is this is a very hard piece of equipment to find. Okay, so now we're about to attach the front clip to Quasi. This is one of those rare opportunities you get a chance to make things better than it was from the factory. This hood never really aligned to the fenders appropriately, and it had nothing to do with all this damage that's over here. It's just more times than not when you're dealing with the Supers and the TIs, the hoods don't necessarily meet squarely in the front like they should. So we get that opportunity in this case. Now, things you can't see because you're looking at this in 2 dimensions is there are a few things that are out of alignment. Like this style line right here is very proud before it falls into this. That means there's going to be a lot of body filler there. So we need to get rid of that so we can match this line so it's very clean going up and around the style line. Right now it goes from the tight curvature to a proud curvature, then it feathers into the appropriate indentation. It's just a styling cue thing, but nonetheless I see it and it can drive me nuts. We have that execution over here. It stays proud, comes out, transitions out like it should. So anyway, it's one of those things, it's kind of hard to see right now, but the minute this thing is in nice new glossy paint, that'll stand out. Anyhow, with that said, there are a few little pieces of metal here and there that we still need to create for this. They weren't there. They were covered up in body filler before we commit this clip to the fenders. But anyway, the whole point behind all of this is now that we can have the hood sitting exactly where it is, we can dictate everything to meet the hood in its new location. That way when we shut the hood, the entire front end sits very clean and appropriately spaced left to right, front to rear. Other than that, we're getting to the point where it's time to commit the front end, finish it up, finish the rocker repairs, and at that time it's time to start taking everything out and start prepping for paint. So we're going to get started. Okay, so a few things have happened. We ran our plumb line here, so we know that the center of the hood, equal gapping on here, okay? Coming down the middle here, because it's easy to manipulate where you want this to go. Now, with that said, by having everything dead center, we're able to identify where all our pressure points are. When I mean pressure points, I mean where metal is coming in contact with the new piece prematurely. It helps us move things around and dictate what needs to be fixed, fine-tuned, if you will. Now, with that said, this entire area over here is just chock full of body filler. Dave's going to go get the grinder and the vacuum cleaner so he can remove all this. But what we did notice was this down here was coming in contact long before any of this. So basically this is being pushed up and away, which is keeping this gap from being squared. This is not rocket science, but however it does take quite a bit of patience before you get too eager to weld it all up. I don't want to give you a false sense of simplicity when it comes to doing this. Grafting on a new front clip is not exactly an easy job. It is a job that's very easy to achieve, but it's going to require some things that may be or may not be within your comfort zone. You're going to end up having to fabricate smalls. Obviously, these are 50-plus-year-old cars, and there is going to be unique little rust or thinned out metal in places that you didn't expect. You're going to have to be able to fabricate those smalls to make things back the way they were, and that can be time consuming. Now, what may or may not be a part of your makeup is you may not have the patience for it. Small pieces like this, the inner piece of the ring, the step down the ring, the flat of the ring, and the drop of the ring all had to be made separately right here, and we call that fractional fabrication. It is not something that is simple. It's really not that difficult, but you have to think your way through it, and it's not just because of the angles, it's also about the multiple complex shapings that everything happens around. In other words, you have a curvature that comes down and around, you have a curvature that's coming in and back out, and then you have a curvature that's sweeping in and away. So those three-dimensional angles can be difficult to make if you're not comfortable or familiar with how to do it. Outside that, this can be achieved in your garage. Granted, you may or may not have all the wonderful tools we have here to create these things, and that will affect how long it takes you to do this. At the end of the day, a lot of time, a lot of patience, you can do what it is you want to do, assuming you have some basic welding skills and tools to create. Anyway, so we created this. As you can see, this has got a peculiar cut to it because I didn't even bother cutting this off to square it up to the light area because it's unnecessary at this point. I need to commit everything else, make sure that this all aligns just like it's supposed to, and then commit the clip to the fenders. And at that point, we can clean up all the incidentals. Now the seam's going to get welded. We're going to use that red stuff you've seen us use before. It's called weld-through primer. And we're going to tighten up all those cuts, weld it all together. At the end of the day, ideally, this is done and we're not going back. Okay, this is one of those may appear to be incremental movements, but the front end is fully welded in. No going back at this point. Notice we still have our nice uniform gaps on the metal fold, which is essential. So if you're looking at buying one of these, this is one of the first places I would look. Kind of hard to see if the bumpers are in place and the lights are on, but you should see what we call an expansion joint, but it's really just where the metal is folded and welded on the back side. Those should be there, okay? In this car, it was not. If you remember or look back at any of the videos on this car in the beginning, all this had about an inch, inch and a half buildup of body filler, because all this was punched back. And now we're at that point where it's really close, all by itself, and it's only going to need a very light skim coat of filler for all the correctional work. But at this point, we have our hood sitting where it needs to be. It's nice and flush here and there, and have a nice uniform gap going all the way back. The other thing is I have a nice uniform gap underneath here, so I don't have to worry about this coming down and hitting this. These are things that are kind of difficult to achieve on these cars when they've been in some kind of damage, but the front end's not coming off. So we're lucky enough, in a way, that though this really nice front clip from Centerline came to us to be welded on regardless, and that we're able to take care of some little things that are somewhat noticeable if you know what you're looking for in this business. So anyway, The entire thing is welded in. I'm sorry I didn't show you a whole lot of video on that process, because quite frankly it's one of those things that you're fighting your way through it, and there's so much that you need to be aware of when you're doing it. For example, when you go to commit this, you got to make sure this headlight bucket is sitting square to the ground, perfectly 90 degrees to the car's ride height, as much as possible anyway. And so that has to be recognized, identified, and worked through, and then you commit that to the fender. And you have to do it on the other side. And also you have to really make sure that when you commit the bottom of the apron that the cross member, or the core support I should say, is where it's supposed to be. If the radiator core support is bent, when you go to commit this to that, there's a little flange on the bottom. You're going to have a very waved front clip that you're going to end up having to either one, cut off again and fix, or two, make up the difference in body form. That's the last thing in the world I want to do. Anyway, so as you can see, it's rather squared up right now, and I'm really pleased with that. But again, if you're doing something like this, you need to be comfortable with doing what we call fractional fabrication, making the little incidental pieces to resolve any lingering issues that are there prior to you getting on it. And that can be very time consuming. It's difficult for you to see right now because of all the grinding marks. There's a multiple step angle right here that you don't necessarily replicate exactly because it gets hidden by the headlight ring, but it's what I'm expected to do, so therefore I need to replicate the way it is. So all this had to be fabricated piece by piece to come down onto where the front marker light's going to be. So that was time consuming. There's pieces up in here that need to be addressed, and that was time consuming. And then obviously we had to make this piece to match the flange because the previous piece was so damaged there's no way we were going to save it. So there's a bunch of little pieces like that that had to be done, and that took an awful lot of time. But in the end, I'm pleased with what the results are. Okay, so the last thing we're going to talk about on the Saturday wrap-up is the radiator. Now obviously this car originally started with a 1600. And when you go from 1600 to a 2 liter, that is a 20% increase in volume, which means that the radiator is already designed for a 1600, but will it handle a 2 liter? In most environments it won't. You're going to have overheating issues. But then when you add on top of that a high performance 2 liter, now you're talking about even greater cooling capacity needs. So what we did, we had the original radiator not only re-cored, but we had it upsized as well. This is a fairly common practice. But in conjunction with that, what we also had was a dimpled core put in. And that slows the fluid down so we get more heat exchange. Now it is common that you see people use aluminum radiators. There's pros and cons of that, but they're mostly cons. And then you see people who have a habit of polishing the brass on top of this. And that is also not a very wise idea. The whole point of radiators being painted this particular black, and it's called a radiator paint, is help transfer or remove heat from the coolant within. The shinier the surface, less transference is happening. So that's just something to think about, especially if you're considering buying a new radiator. It can't be dimensionally the same as what's going in. It has to have a larger cooling capacity to just match what a proper brass radiator will do. Anyhow, so we had an upsized amount of cores put in, and we had them dimpled as to slow down the fluid to increase the heat exchange, or the cooling capacity, if you will. All in all, this is going to look period correct, which is a plus. It's going to handle our 2 liter motor, our high performance 2 liter motor no less, and that to me is probably a wiser move.